The cabin burned like a funeral pyre against the dawn sky flames clawing upward through the roof beams with a roar that drowned out everything except the screams. Miriam's legs moved without conscious thought, her bare feet tearing on the rocky ground as she fled across the high prairie. The infant clutched so tightly against her chest that she could feel his racing heartbeat through the thin cotton of his swaddling. Or perhaps it was her own heart thundering so violently she thought her ribs might crack. Behind her, the riders came. She didn't need to look back to know they were closing the distance. The drumbeat of hooves vibrated through the earth, mixing with the whistle of wind through sage and the terrible sound of her own ragged breathing. Jonah whimpered a thin, terrified sound that tore at something deep in her chest, and Miriam made a wordless noise of comfort, even as tears streaked the soot on her face. Daniel was dead. She'd seen him fall in the doorway, his chest torn open by rifle fire, his hand still reaching toward her in those final seconds. The image burned behind her eyelids. Every time she blinked, her husband of 18 months, the quiet man who'd built this homestead with his own hands, who'd held her through winter storms and promised her a future crumpling like a puppet with cut strings. And Ruth. Sweet Ruth with her gentle laugh and her dreams of schools and churches. Ruth who'd survived childbirth only to die in flames because she was too weak from fever to run. Thomas had been trying to carry her when the cabin wall collapsed. Miriam had heard her sister's final scream even as Thomas shoved the baby into Miriam's arms and shouted for her to run. Run, don't look back. She'd looked back once. Just once. Long enough to see Thomas silhouetted against the inferno, firing through the smoke at the painted riders who circled like wolves. Then the roof had come down in a cascade of sparks and burning timber, and Thomas had vanished. Now there was only Jonah. 4 months old with Ruth's dark eyes and Thomas's stubborn chin. The last piece of her family. The only thing worth saving in a world that had just burned to ash. A bullet kicked up dirt 3 feet to her left. Another whined past her ear close enough that she felt the displacement of air. Miriam sobbed and stumbled, her ankle twisting in a prairie dog hole. Pain lanced up her leg, white hot and blinding. She went down on one knee, catching herself with her free hand, stones tearing her palm open. The hoofbeats grew louder. Miriam forced herself upright, favoring her good leg, and lurched forward. Her torn green calico dress, the church dress Ruth had sewn for her last spring, back when there was still hope, caught on a clump of rabbit brush and ripped further. The leather satchel Thomas had thrust at her along with the baby banged against her hip, heavy with the ledger and papers he'd said were insurance evidence, the truth that would save them if anything went wrong. Everything had gone wrong. The riders were so close now she could hear their shouts, harsh voices calling to each other in a language that might have been Apache or might have been men pretending. She couldn't tell. Didn't care. They'd killed everyone she loved. That was all that mattered. One rider pulled ahead of the others, his paint horse closing the gap with terrible speed. Miriam's vision blurred with exhaustion and terror. Her lungs burned, her legs trembled. She couldn't run anymore. Couldn't save herself. Couldn't save Jonah. She stumbled again this time, falling completely, rolling to protect the baby as she hit the ground. Dust filled her mouth. Jonah wailed a full-throated cry of fear and hunger and confusion. Miriam curled around him, her body a shield waiting for the bullet or the blade. The paint horse skidded to a halt beside her, so close she could smell its sweat. Miriam looked up through her tangled hair at the rider. He wore a beaded shirt that caught the rising sun, rawhide leggings decorated in intricate patterns, his face painted in ochre and black streaks. An Apache warrior or someone dressed to look like one. His rifle was trained not on her, but past her toward the other riders. "Keep to the wash," he said in perfect, unaccented English. His voice was hard, commanding, nothing like the war cries she'd expected. "Downslope toward that fold in the land. Move now." Miriam stared at him, her mind refusing to process the words. He was one of them. He'd chased her. He was going to kill her. He fired his rifle, the shot sharp and precise. Behind them, one of the pursuing riders yelped and tumbled from his saddle. The others scattered, cursing in English, not Apache English, and Miriam's confusion deepened. The warrior's dark eyes fixed on her, intense and urgent. "I said move, unless you want your nephew to die with you." The word nephew cut through her paralysis. How did he know Jonah was her nephew? How did he know anything? Another bullet struck the ground near Jonah's blanket, spraying dirt across them both. The warrior didn't flinch. He fired twice more, driving the riders back, then reached down with one hand. "Take it. Now." Miriam grabbed his hand, calloused, strong, warm with life, and let him haul her upright. Her ankles screamed protest, but she bit down on the pain and ran following his pointed direction toward a shallow arroyo cutting through the prairie. The warrior stayed between her and the gunman, his horse wheeling and dancing, as he fired steadily, methodically, making each shot count. Miriam half fell, half slid into the wash, the sandy bank giving way beneath her feet. She landed hard at the bottom, managing somehow not to drop Jonah, and crawled behind a tangle of dried cottonwood roots. Above, the warrior's rifle cracked again and again until the pursuing riders gave up and retreated, their shouts fading into the wind. Then silence broken only by Jonah's exhausted whimpers and Miriam's rasping breath. The warrior appeared at the edge of the wash, leading his paint horse. He slid down the bank with practiced ease and crouched 10 feet away, his rifle across his knees, studying her with an expression she couldn't read. "They'll circle back," he said. "We have maybe an hour before they find our trail again. Can you walk?" "Who are you?" Miriam's voice came out as a rasp, her throat raw from smoke and screaming. "Why did you help me?" "My name is Gamda. I'm a scout for the U.S. Cavalry, Fort Stanton." He gestured at his painted face, his Apache clothing. "This is camouflage. I've been tracking those men since yesterday. Oh, run, they're not Apache. They're ranch hands and hired guns dressed up to look like raiders." His voice carried an edge of barely controlled fury. "It's an old trick. Frame the Apache, start a war, take the land while everyone's distracted. Your family refused to sell their homestead to Virgil Hobbs. So Hobbs sent his foreman Scarface Sam and a crew of killers to burn you out and make it look like an Indian attack." Miriam's mind reeled. She looked down at Jonah, who'd finally quieted, his small face red and tear-streaked. Her sister's son. The baby Ruth had labored 2 days to bring into this brutal world. All of it, the raid, the fire, Daniel and Ruth and Thomas dying in flames, had been murder dressed up as war. "They killed everyone," she whispered. The words felt too small for the enormity of the loss. "My husband, my sister, her husband, everyone." "I know." Gamda's expression softened slightly, though his eyes remained hard. "I'm sorry I didn't arrive sooner, but you're alive. The child is alive. And you have something they want very badly." He nodded toward her satchel. "That's why they chased you instead of just finishing the burn and leaving." Miriam's hand went to the satchel, feeling the shape of the ledger through the leather. Thomas's insurance. His careful records of bribes and threats and crimes, all dated and documented in his precise hand. She'd glimpsed it only once before this morning, seen the initials H and S. Sam, alongside columns of money and notes about water rights and evictions. "My brother-in-law kept records," she said. "Evidence against Hobbs. Then that ledger is worth more than gold and worth killing for." Gamda glanced up at the prairie rim, checking for movement. "White River has a federal land office and a circuit judge. If we can get that evidence there, Hobbs hangs. But it's 2 days' ride through open country, and he owns the sheriff and half the guns between here and there. Then we're dead anyway." Despair crept into Miriam's voice, heavy and cold. "Not if we're smart. Coal Creek is closer 6 hours if we travel at night. There's a doctor there, Laurent, and a school teacher named Esther. They've helped people before. We get there, we rest, we plan, and then we move when we have better odds. Gamda paused. But I need to know you'll fight. Because if you've given up, tell me now, and I'll take the ledger and the child, and you can do what you want. I won't judge you. The bluntness of it shocked Miriam out of her spiral. She looked at this stranger, this Apache scout, who'd saved her life, who'd risked himself for her and Jonah, and something hardened in her chest, crystallizing around the grief like ice around a stone. I'll fight, she said. Her voice was steady now, almost cold. They murdered my family. They burned my home. I'll fight until they're all in the ground, or I am. Gamda studied her for a long moment, then nodded once satisfied. Good. Then we move as soon as the sun sets. Until then, we hide and we rest. He produced a canteen from his saddle and offered it to her. Drink, small sips, make it last. Miriam took the canteen with shaking hands and drank the water cool and clean, washing the taste of smoke from her mouth. She dampened a corner of Jonah's blanket and wiped his face, then let him suckle the damp cloth while she checked him for injuries. Miraculously, he seemed unhurt, frightened and exhausted, but whole. Gamda moved to the far end of the wash, keeping watch. In the growing daylight, Miriam could see him more clearly, the sharp lines of his face beneath the paint, the scar on his left jaw, old and white blade, made the cavalry boots worn, but well kept. He moved with the controlled economy of someone accustomed to violence, his rifle never far from his hands. Why do you care? She asked after a while. About the ledger, about stopping Hobbs. You're cavalry. Can't you just report this? Gamda was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, his voice low and rough with old pain. 3 years ago, my band was camped near the Mescalero lands. Peaceful. Families, elders, children. White ranchers dressed as Chiricahua raided a stage station, killed 2 drivers. The cavalry came for us in retaliation. He paused, his jaw tightening. They burned our lodges, shot anyone who ran. My younger sister was 12. She'd been helping our grandmother cook. A soldier put a bullet in her back as she tried to reach the trees. Miriam's throat constricted. I'm sorry. We later learned the truth that the raiders were ranchers who wanted our land for grazing, and they'd framed us to get the cavalry to do their killing for them. But by then, it was too late. 6 people dead, including 2 children, and no justice. He turned to look at her, his eyes fierce. Hobbs uses the same tactic. He'll keep doing it until someone stops him. If I let him succeed again, more innocent people die. Yours and mine. So you hunt him. I hunt the truth, and when I find it, I make sure it can't be buried. He gestured at the ledger. That's what you're carrying. Truth. Don't let them take it. The day passed with agonizing slowness. They stayed hidden in the wash, taking turns keeping watch while the other rested. Gamda shared strips of dried meat from his pack venison well seasoned, and Miriam ate mechanically, forcing the food down despite her roiling stomach. Jonah nursed fitfully, sensing her distress, and she held him close, murmuring the lullabies Ruth used to sing. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw flames, saw Daniel falling, heard Ruth screaming, felt the terrible heat as the cabin collapsed. Grief came in waves, threatening to drown her, and she had to grip Jonah tightly to anchor herself to the present, to the need to survive. Gamda watched her with an expression that might have been pity or respect or both, but he didn't speak. He simply kept watch, methodical and patient, occasionally climbing the washbank to scan the prairie. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, that reminded Miriam too much of fire. Gamda knelt beside her. "We move soon. I need to check your ankle first." "It's fine," Miriam said automatically. "It's swollen and you're limping. Let me see it or you'll collapse before we reach Coal Creek, and then we both die." His tone was matter-of-fact, not unkind. Reluctantly, Miriam extended her leg. Gamda's hands were surprisingly gentle as he unlaced her boot Daniel's work made last winter and peeled back her torn stocking. His fingers probed the swelling, and Miriam bit her lip against the sharp pain. "Badly sprained, not broken," he said. "You're lucky." He pulled a strip of cloth from inside his shirt and wrapped her ankle with practiced efficiency, binding it snugly. "This will help, but you'll need to ride if we find horses." "I'm not good with horses." "You'll learn tonight." He glanced at her, a ghost of a smile touching his mouth. Survival is an excellent teacher. Despite everything, Miriam almost smiled back. But the expression died as she thought of what lay ahead, miles of dangerous countrymen hunting them, a baby dependent on her for everything. What if we don't make it? Then we don't make it. Gamda finished the bandage and sat back. But we try. That's all anyone can do. They left the wash as dusk thickened into night. Gamda leading his paint horse and Miriam walking beside him, her hand on the horse's shoulder for balance. The prairie stretched vast and dark in every direction, broken only by the distant silhouettes of mountains against the star-filled sky. Miriam had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable. Every shadow seemed to hide a gunman. Every sound made her flinch. Gamda set a steady pace, keeping to the low ground, avoiding ridgelines and open flats. He moved with the confidence of someone who knew this land, intimately reading the terrain like a book. Twice he stopped abruptly, raising a hand for silence, and they crouched in the sage while distant lantern lights swept across the prairie search parties, methodical and patient. "They're organized," Gamda murmured during the second stop, his eyes tracking the lights. "Professional. Hobbs hired experienced killers, not just ranch hands." "Can we avoid them?" "For a while. But they're spreading out, covering ground. Eventually they'll pick up our trail." He glanced at her, his expression unreadable in the darkness. "We need to move faster. Can you ride if I walk?" "With Jonah?" "I'll tie him to you. It's safer than you walking on that ankle." Miriam hesitated. She'd ridden only a handful of times, always on gentle horses and always with someone leading. But the alternative was slowing them down, getting caught, dying. She nodded. Gamda lifted her onto the paint horse with surprising ease, his hands strong and sure. He positioned Jonah carefully against her chest, then used a long strip of cloth to secure the baby in a makeshift sling. "Hold the reins loosely. The horse will follow me. If something happens and I tell you to run, kick your heels and hold on. He'll run." "What about you?" "I'll manage." He met her eyes, and in the starlight, she saw something shift in his expression, a flicker of concern quickly hidden. "Keep Jonah quiet if you can. Sound carries at night." They continued, Gamda leading the horse through the darkness with unerring instinct. Miriam focused on staying balanced, on keeping Jonah calm, on not thinking about how far they still had to travel. Her torn palm throbbed. Her ankle sent sharp pains up her leg with every jolt. But she clenched her teeth and endured. An hour before dawn, they reached a freight road marked by a leaning telegraph pole and a weathered sign, Coal Creek, 8 miles. Gamda studied the road for a long moment, then swore softly. "What's wrong?" Miriam asked. "Fresh tracks. 2 horses walking patrol." He pointed to the hoof prints visible in the pale dust. "They're watching the road." As if summoned by his words, Two riders emerged from a stand of cottonwoods 50 yards ahead, their silhouettes black against the paling sky. They wore long dusters and broad hats, and even at this distance, Miriam could see the glint of rifle barrels. One called out, "Hold there. We're looking for a woman and a baby traveling with an Indian. Sheriff's orders." Gumda's hand went to Miriam's leg, squeezing once a warning to stay silent. Then he stepped forward, his hands visible, and empty his rifle left with the horse. "I'm alone," he said, his voice carrying clearly. "Just heading to Coal Creek." The riders approached, their horses' hooves loud on the packed road. The nearer one, lean with a drooping mustache, grinned unpleasantly. "Alone, huh? That's funny, 'cause Indians aren't supposed to be on this road after dark. Where's your papers?" "I scout for Fort Stanton. I need no papers." Gumda's tone was calm, almost bored, but Miriam saw the tension in his shoulders. "That's so—" The second rider, heavier with a scar across his nose, spat tobacco juice onto the ground. "Sheriff says a renegade Apache kidnapped a white woman and her baby. Says he's dangerous. Says there's a $100 reward. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? The sheriff is mistaken. Or maybe you're the kidnapper." The mustached rider reached for his rifle. "Either way, you're coming with us." Gumda moved like lightning. He grabbed the rider's boot and yanked hard, pulling him sideways out of the saddle. The man crashed into the telegraph pole with a sickening crack and collapsed in a heap, unmoving. His horse reared, screaming. The scarred rider swore and drew his revolver, but Miriam was already moving. She slid off the paint horse, grabbed Gumda's rifle from the saddle, and fired from the hip, a wild shot that went high, but close enough to make the rider flinch. He fired back his bullet, shattering the telegraph pole's crossbar in a spray of splinters. Gumda lunged forward, wrenching the revolver from the rider's hand and slamming his fist into the man's jaw. The rider toppled from his saddle, landing hard on the road. Gumda was on him instantly, knee on his chest, the revolver pressed to his forehead. "Who sent you?" Gumda demanded. The rider spat blood. "Sam. Scarface Sam. He's Hobbs's foreman. Pays us to watch the roads, keep folks from reaching White River with stories." "How many more like you?" "Dozen, maybe more. Spread out between here and the canyon. You won't make it through Indian. Not with a woman and a baby slowing you down." Gumda's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. He took the rider's guns and ammunition, stuffing them into his saddlebags, then grabbed a canteen and a small cloth sack of hard biscuits. The two horses, spooked, trotted away into the brush. Miriam stood frozen, the rifle still in her hands, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. She'd just shot at a man. Missed, thank heaven, but she'd pulled the trigger without hesitation, without thought. The realization left her shaky and cold. Gumda returned to her, his expression unreadable. He gently took the rifle from her trembling hands. "You did well. I could have killed him. He was trying to kill us. Don't waste sympathy on hired guns." He studied her face for a moment, then added more softly, "But I understand. The first time is always hard. Have you killed many men?" "Enough." The bleakness in his voice made Miriam regret the question. He turned away, checking the paint horse's saddle. "We're close to Coal Creek now. But Dusty Bill the sheriff is in Hobbs's pocket, and if Sam's already there, we'll need to be careful. Stay behind me. If anyone asks, you're my prisoner or runaway settler I'm bringing in. It'll explain why we're together." Miriam nodded numbly. She lifted Jonah from the sling, checking him. The baby had slept through the entire fight, his small face peaceful in the growing light. A wave of tenderness mixed with fierce protectiveness washed over her. She would do anything to keep him safe. Anything at all. They walked the last 2 miles, as dawn broke gold and pink, spilling across the prairie. Coal Creek appeared ahead, a scatter of frame buildings, a church steeple corrals, and loading docks. The smell of wood smoke and livestock drifted on the breeze, and Miriam felt a surge of relief so strong it made her lightheaded. Civilization. Help. Safety, however temporary. But as they entered the town's outskirts, Gamda's hand tightened on her arm, pulling her into the shadow of a livery stable. "Trouble," he murmured. Across the street, Sheriff Dusty Bill stood outside the general store, talking to a tall, lean man whose face bore a distinctive scar from temple to jaw. Scarface Sam, unmistakable, even at a distance. Both men turned as Gamda and Miriam approached their eyes, narrowing with recognition. Sam's hand dropped to his gun. "There," he shouted. "Stop them." Gamda didn't hesitate. He grabbed Miriam's hand and ran, pulling her into the narrow alley between the general store and a saloon. Behind them, boots pounded and voices shouted. Miriam clutched Jonah with one arm and held onto Gamda with the other, her injured ankles screaming as she struggled to keep up. The alleys of Coal Creek were a maze, loading docks, trash heaps, stacked crates covered in canvas. Gamda navigated them with the instinct of someone who'd scouted towns before weaving through gaps barely wide enough for Miriam's skirts, vaulting fences never pausing. Behind them, the pursuit grew louder, closer. "There." Gamda pointed to a 2-story frame building with a painted sign, Dr. Auguste Laurent Physician. They burst through the back door into a dim hallway smelling of carbolic and old paper. A startled woman in a nurse's apron gasped, but Gamda was already moving, dragging Miriam up a narrow staircase to the second floor. Dr. Laurent's office was cluttered with shelves of books, anatomical charts, and a desk buried under papers. The doctor himself, balding around 45, with wire-rimmed spectacles and a neatly trimmed beard, looked up from a ledger, his pen freezing mid-stroke. "Gamda?" His French accent colored the name with surprise. "What in blazes? No time, doctor. She needs help. The baby needs help. And we need to hide." Gamda's words came fast, urgent, fast. "Sam's right behind us." Laurent's gaze swept over Miriam, her torn dress, her soot-streaked face, her bleeding hands, and the infant in her arms. His expression shifted instantly from confusion to professional concern. "Put the child on the examination table. Madame, please sit before you collapse." Miriam's legs gave out, and she sank into a chair near the desk. Gamda moved to the window, peering through the curtain at the street below. "They're searching the buildings. We have maybe 2 minutes." Laurent unwrapped Jonah from his blanket with practiced gentleness, his hands checking the baby's breathing, his color, his responsiveness. "Smoke inhalation," he murmured. "Mild, but he needs clean air and rest." "Has he been fed?" "Not since yesterday morning," Miriam said, her voice breaking. "I have nothing to give him." "I have goat's milk. We'll warm it and see if he'll take it." Laurent looked at Gamda. "What happened?" "Hobbs sent a crew of killers dressed as Apache to raid her homestead. Killed her family, burned the place. She escaped with the baby and evidence, a ledger documenting Hobbs's crimes. Now, every hired gun in the territory is hunting her." Laurent's expression darkened. He turned to Miriam, his eyes kind behind his spectacles. "Your family, madame. I'm deeply sorry." Miriam couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. She nodded once, tears spilling down her cheeks. Heavy boots tramped up the stairs outside. A fist hammered on the door. "Dr. Laurent, open up. Sheriff's business." Laurent moved quickly. He doused the lamp, gestured for Gamda and Miriam to crouch behind the examination table, and slipped the ledger into a desk drawer in one smooth motion. Then he opened the door a crack, blocking the entrance with his body. "Sheriff, how may I help you?" His voice was perfectly calm, professionally courteous. Searching for fugitives. Apache scout named Gamda traveling with a white woman and a stolen baby. Dangerous. Seen them. Dusty Bill's voice was gravelly impatient. Stolen baby, that's preposterous. I've seen no one matching that description, Sheriff. Mind if we look? I do mind. I have a patient resting high fever, possibly contagious. Return with a warrant if you insist, but I won't endanger public health for a search without legal cause. A pause. Then Sam's voice sharp and suspicious. Mighty convenient, Doc. Convenient or not, it's the law. Good day, Sheriff. Laurent shut the door firmly and locked it. The boots lingered outside for a long moment, long enough that Miriam held her breath, Jonah pressed against her chest, Gamda's hand resting on his rifle. Then the footsteps retreated down the stairs, and Laurent exhaled slowly. They'll return, he said quietly. Dusty Bill's lazy, but not entirely stupid. You can't stay here long. A soft knock came at the side door, 3 quick taps, then 2 slow. Laurent visibly relaxed and opened it, admitting a tall woman of about 35 in a plain gray dress and sensible boots. She carried a basket of school books and surveyed the room with calm, intelligent eyes. Esther, Laurent said with evident relief. Thank heaven. Esther took in the scene, Gamda by the window, Miriam in the chair holding Jonah, the tension in the air without visible surprise. I saw the commotion. Dusty and Sam are turning the town upside down. What's the situation? Laurent gestured to the desk drawer. Evidence of Hobbs's crimes. Enough to convict him in federal court if it reaches a judge. Esther pulled out the ledger and examined it with the practiced eye of an educated woman. Her expression grew grave. This is explosive. But getting it to White River means crossing 2 days of open country with Hobbs's men everywhere, and the weather's turning. She glanced at the window where dark clouds were massing on the horizon. Stonebridge Canyon will flood if that storm breaks. You'll be trapped. There must be another way, Miriam said desperately. There is. Esther pulled a hollowed-out children's reader from her basket, the spine intact, the interior carved out to create a hidden compartment. I smuggled abolition pamphlets during the war. This will work for your ledger. I can also send a coded telegraph to the federal land judge in Santa Fe, alerting him to expect evidence. But you'll need safe transport. Victor, Laurent said suddenly. Esther's cousin. He drives a freight wagon to White River, leaves at dawn tomorrow. He's trustworthy. And the canyon? Gamda asked. Esther frowned. Hobbs has claimed the Stonebridge Road as private property, posted guards. No one passes without his say-so. If you're caught there during a flood. She trailed off, the implication clear. We'll cross that bridge when we reach it. Gamda said grimly. Literally. Despite the tension, Miriam felt a hysterical laugh bubble up and suppressed it. The absurdity of planning around potential drowning while hiding from murderers struck her as both tragic and darkly funny. Laurent retrieved a bottle of milk, warmed it over a small alcohol lamp, and brought it to Miriam. Jonah latched onto the bottle, eagerly sucking with desperate hunger, and Miriam felt tears of relief prick her eyes. The baby would survive this at least. She'd make certain of it. As night fell and the storm clouds gathered, they made their plans. Victor arrived after dark, a soft-spoken Czech immigrant of about 40, with stooped shoulders, kind eyes, and work-worn hands. He listened to their story with grave attention, then nodded slowly. Dr. Laurent saved my daughter's life last winter when the fever came. I owe him everything. And if Hobbs is as evil as you say, someone must stop him. He looked at Miriam, his expression earnest. I will hide you in my wagon. It is risky, but what is life without risk for the right cause? Thank you, Miriam said, gripping his hand. I won't forget this. Let us hope we all live to remember it, Victor replied with a sad smile. They prepared to leave in the dead hours before dawn. Laurent gave them medical supplies, extra bandages, a bottle of laudanum for pain. Esther pressed a small derringer into Miriam's hand. Last resort, she said simply. 2 shots. Make them count. Miriam slipped the gun into her pocket, its weight both comforting and terrifying. As they descended the back stairs, Miriam turned to Laurent and Esther. If we don't make it, you'll make it, Laurent interrupted firmly. You must. Too many people are counting on you. And if Hobbs retaliates against you for helping us, let him try. Esther's smile was cold and determined. This town has been under his boot for too long. It's time someone pushed back. The freight wagon waited in the alley, its bed loaded with barrels and crates. Victor helped Miriam climb into a space near the back, arranging the cargo to create a small hollow where she could lie with Jonah. He covered them with a heavy canvas tarp that smelled of dust and old grain. It will be uncomfortable, Victor warned, but you must stay hidden until we are far from town. I understand. Miriam settled Jonah against her chest, feeling the baby's warmth, his steady heartbeat. As long as he lived, part of Ruth lived too. That was worth any discomfort. Gomda climbed onto the driver's bench beside Victor, his rifle hidden under a blanket. Through a gap in the tarp, Miriam saw him glance back toward her hiding place, his expression unreadable in the darkness. Then Victor clucked to the mules, and the wagon lurched into motion. They rolled out of Coal Creek as the first drops of rain began to fall, fat, heavy drops that struck the canvas with the sound of distant drums. Miriam lay in the darkness, holding Jonah, listening to the wagon's creaking wheels and the mule's steady hoofbeats. Her body ached. Her heart ached. But beneath the pain, something else stirred a cold, hard determination. She'd survived this far. She'd keep surviving until Hobbs paid for what he'd done. The road to White River climbed through pinon and juniper country before descending into the canyon lands. Rain turned the dust to mud, and the wagon's wheels slipped and stuck repeatedly. Victor coaxed the mules with patient check endearments, while Gomda kept watch, his rifle never far from his hands. Miriam dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sudden lurch or sound. Jonah slept peacefully, his breathing soft and even against her chest. She let herself imagine for one stolen moment a future where they survived, where the ledger reached the judge, where justice was served, where she could rebuild some semblance of a life for this child. The fantasy shattered as the wagon lurched to a sudden halt. Voices outside rough commanding. Roads closed by order of Mr. Hobbs. Turn back. Victor's calm reply. I carry freight for White River. Medical supplies. Dr. Laurent's orders. Don't care. No one passes without Mr. Hobbs's written permission. I have a manifest. We have guns. That beats paper. Turn around, old man, or we turn you around. Miriam held her breath, her hand instinctively covering Jonah's mouth. Through the gap in the tarp, she saw shadows moving, 4, maybe 5 men on horseback, their slickers gleaming with rain. Then gunfire erupted. The first shot hit Victor in the shoulder, spinning him sideways on the bench. He gasped in pain, but didn't fall. The second shot shattered the wagon's side rail, sending splinters flying. Gomda returned fire, his rifle cracking sharply, and one of the riders toppled from his saddle with a scream. Go! Victor shouted, his voice strained. He grabbed something from his pocket, a small envelope, and thrust it at Gomda. From Esther. Take it. Save them. Go! Miriam threw off the tarp and seized the reins, her heart hammering. Victor was bleeding, his face gray with pain, but he was pushing her forward, telling her to drive. She snapped the reins hard, and the mules lunged forward, terrified by the gunfire. The wagon careened down the muddy road, sliding sideways around a bend. Bullets thudded into the cargo. One punched through a barrel, spilling flour in a white cloud. Miriam ducked low, shielding Jonah with her body, while Gamda fired from the back, his shots precise and deadly. 2 more riders fell. The others pulled back, regrouping. Victor had rolled under the wagon, his revolver in hand, covering their escape, even as blood soaked his shirt. Miriam caught one last glimpse of him, this brave man, who owed them nothing, who'd risked everything before the wagon rounded another bend. And he disappeared from view. A sharp crack echoed behind them, followed by shouting. Then silence. "Victor?" Miriam whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He bought us time," Gamda said grimly, climbing back onto the bench beside her. His hands covered hers on the reins, steadying them. "Don't let it be wasted." They drove on through the rain, the canyon walls rising around them like the jaws of a trap. Gamda opened the envelope Victor had given him. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a telegraph copy, carbon smudged but legible to Sam, paint up. "Make it look Apache. Drive them out. Burn if needed." Miriam stared at the message, her blood turning to ice. Proof. Undeniable, documented proof of Hobbs's orders. Victor had died to deliver this. "We finish this," Gamda said, his voice hard as stone. "For Victor, for your family, for everyone Hobbs has destroyed. We finish it." Miriam nodded, unable to speak past the grief and rage choking her. She clutched Jonah tighter and drove the wagon deeper into the canyon toward whatever waited ahead. Stonebridge Canyon was a wound in the earth, its sandstone walls glowing like copper in the storm's half-light. Rain poured in sheets, turning the rocky trail into a treacherous river of mud. The wagon skidded and bucked as Miriam fought the reins, her arms burning with effort. Beside her, Gamda scanned the cliffs, his expression tense. They'll be waiting at the bridge. Sam knows it's the only crossing. "Can we go around?" "Not with a wagon. There's a boulder ford downstream, but we'd have to abandon the supplies and cross on foot." He glanced at Jonah, still miraculously sleeping despite the chaos. "With the baby in this weather, it's suicide." "Then what do we do?" "We see what we're facing first. Then we improvise." Gamda's mouth quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile. "I'm good at improvising." The canyon narrowed until the walls seemed to lean over them, oppressive and dark. The trail followed a dry wash that was rapidly filling with runoff brown water frothing around the wagon wheels. Thunder echoed off the stone so loud, Miriam felt it in her chest. Then they saw it, Stone Bridge. It was a natural formation, a span of sandstone barely wide enough for 2 wagons arching over a slot canyon 30 feet deep. Below, the river churned and roared, swollen with rain, carrying branches and debris in its violent current. In dry weather, the bridge was merely dangerous. In a storm, it was a death trap. And on the far side stood 6 mounted men, rifles leveled. Even through the rain, Miriam recognized Scarface Sam at their center, tall, lean, his distinctive scar visible even at this distance. Sam's voice carried over the storm. "Hold their end of the line, woman." Gamda pulled the wagon to a halt 50 yards from the bridge. He handed the reins to Miriam and picked up his rifle, his movements deliberate and calm. "Keep the baby quiet. If I fall, ride downstream to the ford. Don't stop, don't look back. Gamda, you can't fight 6 men. Watch me." He glanced at her, and in that brief moment, Miriam saw something flicker in his eyes, something that looked almost like regret. His hand touched hers briefly, his fingers warm against her cold skin. "If I don't make it know that you're the bravest person I've ever met, your family would be proud." Before Miriam could respond, he climbed down and walked toward the bridge, his rifle held ready but not raised. Sam watched him approach, grinning. "The Apache scout," Sam called. "Heard you were causing trouble. Hobbs wants you dead almost as much as he wants that ledger. Hobbs wants to cover up murder." Gamda replied, his voice carrying clearly. "That's all this is. Greed and murder. Greed built this territory. Hobbs owns half of it. He'll own the rest soon enough." Sam leaned forward in his saddle. "I'll make this simple. Hand over the ledger, the woman, and the baby. You can walk away. Live to fight another day. And if I refuse, then we take them by force and you die. Your choice." Gamda glanced back at the wagon, at Miriam's pale face. She met his eyes across the distance and shook her head slightly. "Don't give up. Don't surrender. They'd come too far." He turned back to Sam. "No deal?" Sam's grin faded. "Pity?" He raised his hand to signal his men. Lightning split the sky with a crack like artillery fire, striking a dead cottonwood on the cliff above the bridge. The tree exploded in a shower of sparks and burning splinters toppling across the trail in a wall of fire and smoke. The horses screamed, rearing. Sam's men scattered, shouting in panic. "Now!" Gamda sprinted back to the wagon, leaping onto the bench. "Drive while they're confused." Miriam didn't hesitate. She whipped the reins and the mules lunged forward, terrified, charging toward the bridge. Behind them, gunfire erupted, bullets whining past their heads, striking the wagon bed with meaty thunks. The bridge loomed before them, slick and narrow, rain-slick stone gleaming. Miriam's hands clenched the reins so hard her knuckles went white. Beside her, Gamda fired steadily, each shot carefully aimed, driving Sam's men to cover. The wagon hit the bridge at full speed, wheels bouncing over uneven stone. For one heart-stopping moment, Miriam felt the right wheels lift the wagon, tilting toward the abyss. Jonah wailed, finally awake and terrified. Miriam screamed. Gamda threw his weight left and the wheels slammed back down. They careened forward, the bridge shuddering beneath them. Miriam caught a glimpse of the churning water below, brown and violent and hungry. Then the wagon's rear axle struck a protruding rock with a splintering crack. The back end dropped, dragging sparks from the stone. The wagon slewed sideways, momentum carrying it toward the edge. Time seemed to slow. Miriam saw Gamda reach for her, saw his hand close on her arm, saw the determination in his face as he pulled her and Jonah forward with desperate strength. They tumbled off the front of the wagon as the back half tipped over the edge and fell crashing down into the slot canyon in an explosion of splintered wood and barrels. The mules broke free, galloping away into the storm. Miriam landed hard on the stone Gamda's body, cushioning her fall. Jonah somehow still clutched safely against her chest. For a moment, she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only lie there gasping while rain poured down and thunder shook the world. "Move," Gamda gasped. "Miriam, move." He pulled her upright, his face gray with pain. Blood streamed from a cut on his temple where he'd struck the stone. Behind them, Sam and his men were regrouping, bringing their panicked horses under control. Gamda fired twice more, then grabbed Miriam's hand and ran, pulling her toward a narrow trail that switchbacked up the canyon wall. Old mining trail, only way out. They scrambled upward, half climbing, half crawling the trail, barely 2 feet wide in places, with a sheer drop on one side. Miriam's injured ankles screamed protest, but fear drove her forward. Behind them, Sam's voice rose in a furious bellow. "After them! Don't let them escape!" Gunfire cracked against the rocks, chips of stone stinging Miriam's face. Gamda returned fire his shots, forcing the pursuers to take cover. They climbed higher, the trail steep and treacherous, winding through pinon and juniper that clung to impossible angles. Behind them, a deep, grinding sound echoed through the canyon. Miriam glanced back and saw the bridge shudder cracks spreading across its surface. The flood was rising, undercutting the ancient stone. As she watched, a section of the span collapsed with a roar, taking 2 of Sam's men with it into the churning torrent. Their screams cut off abruptly. Sam himself stood on the far bank, his face contorted with rage. He raised his rifle and fired at Miriam, the bullet striking the cliff inches from her head. "You're dead, woman, you hear me, dead." Gamda fired back, and Sam dove behind a boulder. They reached the canyon rim as full darkness fell, collapsing onto a flat shelf of rock beneath an overhang. Rain poured down in solid sheets. The roar of the flood below was deafening. Miriam huddled against the cliff, holding Jonah close, her entire body shaking with exhaustion and shock. Gamda sat beside her, reloading his rifle with hands that trembled slightly. Blood soaked his sleeve from a wound Miriam hadn't noticed, a bullet graze along his upper arm, deep and bleeding freely. "You're hurt," she said. "Flesh wound. I'll live." But his voice was strained, and when he tried to lift his arm, he grimaced. "Let me see." Miriam shifted Jonah to one side and reached for Gamda's arm. He started to protest, then subsided, letting her examine the wound. It was ugly, but not life-threatening, the bullet having torn through muscle without hitting bone. She tore a strip from her already tattered petticoat and bound it tightly, her fingers clumsy with cold and fatigue. "Thank you," Gamda said quietly. "You saved our lives. Multiple times." Miriam met his eyes, seeing her own exhaustion reflected there, along with something else, a fierce determination that matched her own. "I'm starting to lose count." "Don't. I'm keeping track." His mouth quirked in a faint smile. "I'll collect payment later." "What kind of payment?" "Haven't decided yet. Maybe a hot meal. Maybe a roof over my head for a night." His smile faded, and his expression grew serious. Maybe just knowing that Hobbs pays for what he's done. "He will." Miriam said the words of vow. "I promise you he will." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the storm rage. Jonah nursed at the damp cloth Miriam had soaked with rainwater, his small face serious and trusting. Looking at him, Miriam felt the weight of responsibility settle heavier on her shoulders. This child was counting on her. Victor had died for her. Gamda had risked everything for her. She couldn't fail them. "The ford," she said suddenly. "You mentioned a boulder ford downstream. Can we still reach it? In this flood, it's dangerous. But staying here is more dangerous. Sam will find a way around the collapsed bridge. Might take him hours, but he'll do it." Gamda studied the canyon below, barely visible through the rain. "We wait until dawn, let the flood recede slightly, then we try for the ford. It's our best chance. And if we don't make it across, then we don't make it across." He looked at her, his expression somber. "But we try. Because the alternative is surrendering, and I won't do that. Not after everything." "Neither will I." They settled in to wait out the long night, taking turns keeping a watch while the other rested. Miriam dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound, dreaming of flames and screaming, and Daniel's hand reaching for her. Each time she woke, Gamda was there, solid and real, his presence an anchor in the chaos. Once, during the darkest hours before dawn, she woke to find him watching her, his expression unguarded. "You should sleep," she murmured. "So should you." "Can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see them. Daniel. Ruth. Thomas." Her voice broke. "I can't stop seeing them die." Gamda was silent for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "After my sister died, I saw her everywhere. In every child's face, every laugh, every small moment of joy. It hurt so much I wanted to stop existing." He paused. But then I realized she'd be furious with me for giving up. She was fierce, my sister. Stubborn. She'd want me to keep fighting to make sure no one else suffered what she did. So that's what I do. Does it help the fighting? Sometimes. It gives me purpose. And purpose keeps you alive when nothing else will. He met her eyes. You have purpose now. Jonah needs you. Justice needs you. That's enough to survive on. Miriam nodded, feeling something shift inside her, a hardening, a crystallization of grief into determination. She would survive this. She would make sure Jonah survived, and she would see Hobbs answer for every drop of blood he'd spilled. Thank you, she said softly, for everything, for saving us, for staying with us. I know you didn't have to. Yes, I did. Gamda's voice was firm. Some things you have to do even when they're hard, even when they're dangerous. Because if you don't, you're not really living. You're just existing. Is that why you became a scout, to have purpose? Partly. And partly because I'm good at tracking, at reading land and weather and people. The cavalry pays well, and it lets me protect my band by preventing conflicts before they start. He paused. Though sometimes, like with your family, I'm too late. That's the part that haunts me. You weren't too late for Jonah, or for me. No. He smiled faintly. No, I wasn't. Small victories. They're not small to us. They sat in companionable silence after that shoulders touching, sharing warmth against the cold. Miriam found herself acutely aware of his presence. The steady rhythm of his breathing, the solid strength of his shoulder against hers, the way his hand rested near hers on the stone, close enough to touch, but not quite touching. She'd known this man for less than 2 days, but he felt more real, more present than people she'd known for years. Maybe it was the intensity of their shared danger. Maybe it was the way he'd proven himself trustworthy through action rather than words. Or maybe it was simply that survival stripped away all pretense, leaving only the essential truth of a person. Whatever the reason, Miriam realized, she trusted Gamda completely with her life, with Jonah's life, with the terrible weight of grief and responsibility she carried. That trust was a gift she hadn't expected to give again, not after losing everyone she'd loved. As dawn broke gray and cold over the canyon, Gamda rose and checked his weapons. Time to move, the floods receding. Miriam gathered Jonah, who'd slept peacefully through most of the night, miraculously resilient. She checked the satchel, the ledger, and the telegraph copy were still there, slightly damp but intact. Everything they'd suffered for, everything Victor had died for, still safe. They descended a precarious trail to the canyon floor, where the flood had left a landscape, transformed boulders, relocated trees, stripped bare. The river still running high and fast, but no longer the raging torrent of last night. The boulder ford was half a mile downstream, a line of massive stones jutting from the current, like stepping stones across a giant's pathway. In low water, it would have been merely difficult. In flood conditions, even receding, it looked impossible. We cross here, Gamda said, studying the current. It's our only chance. Miriam stared at the churning water, her heart sinking. I can't swim. And Jonah. I'll carry Jonah. You hold on to me. Step exactly where I step. Don't look at the water, look at my back. Trust me. I do trust you. Miriam meant it completely. Gamda tied Jonah's blanket into a sling across his chest, securing the baby snugly. Jonah gazed up at him with solemn dark eyes, as if understanding the gravity of the moment. You're brave, little one, Gamda murmured. Like your aunt. He handed Miriam the satchel. Keep this dry. If I slip, you grab a boulder and hold on. Someone will find you. If you slip, I'm holding on to you, Miriam said firmly. We're in this together. Something flickered in Gamda's eyes, surprise perhaps, or gratitude. He nodded once. Then don't let go. They waded into the shallows. The water was shockingly cold, tugging at Miriam's skirts with greedy fingers. Gamda stepped onto the first boulder, his balance perfect despite the slick surface. Miriam followed her hand, gripping the back of his shirt. 1 step, 2, 3. The river roared around them, spraying cold mist into their faces. Miriam's foot slipped, and she gasped, but Gamda's hand shot back, steadying her. "Slow," he said over the noise. "Breathe. You're doing well." They reached the midpoint, the deepest, fastest section. Gamda paused, assessing the next gap. It was wide, nearly 4 feet over churning white water. He turned to Miriam. "This one's hard. I'll jump first, then reach back for you. When I say jump, you jump. Don't hesitate." Miriam's mouth was too dry to speak. She nodded. Gamda leapt, landing solidly on the next boulder. He turned, extending his hand. "Now, Miriam, jump now." She gathered her courage, fixed her eyes on his face, and jumped. Her foot hit the edge of the boulder, slipped. Gamda's hand clamped onto her wrist, yanking her forward with brutal strength. She collided with him. Jonah pressed between them, and for a moment they stood frozen on the narrow stone, breathing hard, the water roaring below. "I've got you," Gamda said, his voice rough. "I've got you." Miriam realized she was gripping his shirt with both hands, her face pressed against his shoulder. She could feel his heart hammering as hard as her own. Slowly, she loosened her grip and stepped back, meeting his eyes. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We're only halfway." They continued step by agonizing step, until at last they reached the far bank and collapsed onto the muddy shore. Miriam lay on her back, staring at the sky, Jonah's weight on her chest, reassuring and solid. Beside her, Gamda sat up slowly, water dripping from his hair, and scanned the canyon walls. "They'll be close," he said. "Sam won't give up." As if summoned, a voice echoed from the canyon rim above. "There they are." Miriam's heart plummeted. She pushed herself upright and saw them, 6 riders appearing on the trail ahead, blocking their path. Scarface Sam sat at their center, his face a mask of cold fury. "You're trapped now," Sam called down. "Nowhere left to run. Hand over the ledger, and maybe I'll let the baby live." Miriam rose slowly, clutching Jonah, her mind racing. They were cornered, river at their backs, gunmen ahead, exhausted and out of options. But the ledger was still in her hands. Victor's sacrifice, her family's deaths, all came down to this moment. Gamda stood beside her, his rifle ready, but his face resigned. "I can't fight 6 men, not and protect you both." "Then I'll give him the ledger." Miriam's voice was steady, though her heart was breaking. "No." Gamda turned to face her, his eyes fierce. "Victor died for that ledger. Your family died protecting it. If we surrender it now, every sacrifice was meaningless." "Then what do we do?" He looked at the canyon walls and the narrow trail, the river. A desperate plan formed behind his eyes. "Trust me one more time. I'll draw them onto that ledge." He pointed to a narrow shelf of rock above Sam's position. "You take Jonah and run downstream. There's a mine entrance half a mile down, marked by timbers. Hide there. I'll find you. You'll die drawing them off. Maybe not." He stepped closer, his hand cupping her cheek briefly, his touch warm against her cold skin. "But if I do tell Jonah that his family fought for justice, tell him it mattered." "Gamda?" He kissed her forehead, a brief, fierce touch, and then released her and ran not toward Sam, but along the canyon wall, climbing toward the ledge he'd indicated. Sam's men opened fire bullets, striking rock all around him. Miriam stood frozen for 1 heartbeat, too, watching Gamda climb with the agility of someone who knew stone intimately. Then she ran clutching Jonah, heading downstream as fast as her injured ankle would allow. Behind her, Gamda reached the ledge and opened fire on Sam's men, his shots precise and deadly. One man fell. Another ducked behind a boulder. Sam shouted orders, his voice carrying across the canyon. Miriam ran harder, tears streaming down her face, promising herself that Gamda's sacrifice wouldn't be in vain. Then she heard it, a sharp crack, followed by a rumbling sound that grew rapidly louder. She glanced back and saw Gamda firing not at men, but at the canyon wall above them. His bullet struck a precarious boulder, and the ancient stone shifted, cracked, and began to fall. The landslide was devastating. Boulders the size of wagons tumbled down the cliff face, crashing onto the trail where Sam's men had been moments before. Screams cut through the thunder of falling rock. Horses bolted, men dove for cover, and two weren't fast enough, vanishing beneath the avalanche. When the dust settled, the trail was blocked by a massive pile of rubble. Sam and two remaining men were trapped on the far side, shouting in frustration. Gamda appeared at Miriam's side, breathing hard, his face gray with pain. His shoulder wound had reopened, blood soaking through the makeshift bandage. "Bought us time, maybe an hour. We need to move." "You're bleeding." "Later. Move now." They stumbled downstream, Miriam half supporting Gamda, until they found the mine entrance he'd mentioned, a dark opening framed by rotting timbers, partially collapsed, but still passable. They ducked inside, just as voices echoed from upstream. Sam had found a way around the rock slide. The mine was cold and dark, smelling of damp earth and old minerals. Gamda sagged against the wall, his breathing labored. Miriam set Jonah down carefully and turned to examine Gamda's shoulder. "Let me see," she said, her voice allowing no argument. He didn't resist this time, too exhausted to protest. Miriam carefully peeled away the blood-soaked bandage, revealing the torn wound. It needed stitches, but she had nothing to work with. She tore another strip from her petticoat. She was running out of petticoat fast and bound the wound as tightly as she dared. As her fingers worked, Gamda watched her face. "You're good at this," he said quietly. "I've patched up Daniel a dozen times, farm accidents mostly." Her throat tightened at the memory. He was always doing something reckless. "You loved him." "I did. Not passionately, perhaps, but steadily. He was kind and reliable, and he made me feel safe." She met Gamda's eyes. "It feels like a lifetime ago. 2 days ago. Has it only been 2 days?" Miriam shook her head in disbelief. "It feels like forever." "Surviving does that. Stretches time." He winced as she tied off the bandage. "Thank you. You keep saving my life. Least I can do is try to keep you alive long enough to collect that payment you mentioned." He smiled faintly. "I'll hold you to that." They sat in silence for a moment, catching their breath. Jonah whimpered, and Miriam gathered him close, checking him for injuries. Miraculously, he was unharmed, wet and hungry, but whole. She dampened a cloth with water from Gamda's canteen and let him suckle it, providing what comfort she could. "They're getting closer." Gamda said, his voice tight. Sam's persistent. "So are we." "Yes." He looked at her with something like admiration. "Yes, you are." Before Miriam could respond, voices echoed from the mine entrance. Sam's voice, harsh and triumphant. "Found their trail. They went in here." Gamda pushed himself upright, raising his rifle. "Stay behind me." But Miriam had had enough of hiding. She pulled out Esther's derringer, checked that it was loaded, and stood beside him. "Together," she said simply. Sam appeared in the mine entrance, backlit by daylight, his scarred face twisted with rage. 2 men flanked him, rifles raised. "End of the line," Sam said. "Hand over the ledger." "No." Miriam replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Then you die, and I'll take it from your corpse. You'll have to shoot through me first, Gamda said, stepping slightly in front of Miriam. Sam raised his rifle, and the mine entrance erupted in chaos. Riders poured into the canyon outside, a dozen or more, led by a man in a long coat, bearing a federal marshal's star. Behind him rode townspeople from Coal Creek, Vernon, Dr. Laurent, Esther, and others Miriam recognized, all armed and determined. "Federal Marshal," the lead rider shouted. "Drop your weapons." Sam spun his face, going white. His men immediately dropped their rifles, hands raised. Sam himself hesitated, then slowly lowered his gun, fury and disbelief warring on his face. The marshal dismounted and entered the mine, his sharp eyes taking in the scene, Gamda bleeding, Miriam clutching the baby, the standoff. "You're the woman who sent the telegraph from Coal Creek." "My friend sent it. I just survived long enough to deliver the proof." Miriam pulled out the ledger and the telegraph copy, her hands shaking with relief and exhaustion. "This is evidence of Virgil Hobbs's crimes. Murder, arson, land fraud, conspiracy. Everything you need to convict him." The marshal examined the documents with grave attention, his expression darkening. "This is substantial. We'll need your testimony as well, but this should be enough to bring him to trial." He looked at his deputies. "Arrest these men. Charges: murder, conspiracy, attempted murder. We'll add more once we sort through this evidence." As the deputies hauled Sam and his men out of the mine, Vernon hurried over to Miriam. "We came as soon as we got Esther's message. Rode all night. Are you all right?" "We're alive," Miriam said, her voice breaking. "But Victor..." Vernon's expression fell. "We found him this morning. I'm sorry, Miriam. He fought bravely to the last." Miriam closed her eyes, grief washing over her. Another life lost, another debt she could never repay. Gamda's hand found her shoulder, squeezing gently, a silent offer of comfort. Dr. Laurent appeared with his medical bag, immediately focusing on Gamda's shoulder. "Sit before you fall. This needs proper stitching." While Laurent worked, the marshal questioned Miriam, taking detailed notes about the raid, the chase, the evidence. Miriam told him everything, her voice steady despite the exhaustion threatening to overwhelm her. This was the moment they'd fought for, the chance to bring Hobbs to justice. She wouldn't waste it. "And Virgil Hobbs?" she asked when she'd finished. "Where is he?" "We're bringing him in now," the marshal replied. "My men went to the Double H Ranch this morning with warrants. He's being transported to White River as we speak." As if summoned, a rider appeared at the canyon mouth, another deputy leading a fine bay horse. The man on the horse was perhaps 50, well-dressed in expensive clothes that were now mud-spattered, his face a mask of cold fury. Even without introduction, Miriam knew him. Virgil Hobbs. Black Jack. The man who'd ordered her family murdered. Hatred rose in her chest, hot and fierce. She took a step toward him before Gamda's hand on her arm stopped her. "Don't," Gamda said quietly. "Let the law handle him. He killed them, all of them. I know, and he'll pay. But not like this. Not through vengeance, through justice." Gamda's eyes were somber. "That's what Victor died for. What your family died for. Don't dishonor them by becoming what he is." Miriam trembled with the effort of restraining herself, but Gamda was right. She stepped back, her hand finding his gripping tightly. The marshal confronted Hobbs, holding up the ledger and the telegraph copy. "Mr. Hobbs, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, arson, land fraud, and crimes against the territorial government. You'll be held in White River pending trial." Hobbs's face went from fury to shock to a carefully blank expression. "I want a lawyer." "You'll get one," And a fair trial. More than you gave your victims. The marshal nodded to his deputies, who took Hobbs into custody. As they led the rancher away, Hobbs glanced back at Miriam. For a moment their eyes met, and she saw not remorse, but cold calculation, as if he was already planning his defense, his escape. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "Yes, it is," Miriam replied. "You just don't know it yet." They rode into White River as the sun broke through the storm clouds, painting the world in gold. The town turned out to watch curious faces, whispered conversations, the weight of attention on Miriam and Gamda as they rode at the center of the marshal's group. Dr. Laurent commandeered rooms at the hotel, insisting on proper medical care. He stitched Gamda's shoulder with practiced efficiency, applied clean bandages, and ordered rest. Jonah was examined thoroughly and declared healthy if underweight. "He's a fighter," Laurent said, smiling as Jonah grabbed his finger. "Like his aunt." The circuit judge convened court the next day in the town's freight hall, hastily cleared of cargo for the occasion. The trial was swift but thorough, the evidence damning. The ledger was entered as Exhibit A, each entry explained in painstaking detail. The telegraph copy was authenticated by 2 witnesses, including Esther's cousin, the telegraph operator. Esther testified about the systematic intimidation of settlers. Vernon described the threats and violence. Laurent provided medical testimony about the wounds on the recovered bodies, bullet wounds, matching Hobbs's guns, not Apache arrows. Gamda testified about the fake tracks, the staged nature of the raid, and how similar tactics had been used against his own people. His voice was calm but hard as stone as he described finding Miriam fleeing with the baby. The gunman in Apache disguised the deliberate framing of his band. Miriam testified last, her voice shaking at first, but growing stronger as she described the raid, her family's deaths. Thomas pressing the ledger into her hands and telling her to run. She looked directly at Hobbs as she spoke, forcing him to hear what he'd done to see the human cost of his greed. Hobbs's lawyer attempted to discredit the evidence, to claim the ledger was forged, that the witnesses were unreliable. But the documentation was too precise, too detailed, too consistent. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours, guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Hobbs to hang for murder with additional sentences for arson, conspiracy, and fraud. Scarface Sam, tried separately, received life imprisonment. The other gunmen received sentences ranging from 10 to 30 years. Sheriff Dusty Bill, facing charges of corruption and obstruction, was allowed to resign and leave the territory quietly, his career finished. As the courtroom emptied, Miriam stood outside in the afternoon sun, holding Jonah, feeling the weight of the past days finally begin to lift. It wasn't over. Grief didn't end with a verdict, but justice had been served. That was something. Vernon approached, hat in hands. "My family would be honored to have you stay with us while you rebuild. The children would love a baby to fuss over, and my wife's a wonderful cook." "Thank you, Vernon. I'll take you up on that, at least for a while." Miriam squeezed his hand. "You're a good man." Esther joined them, carrying a bundle of official-looking documents. "The land office has restored your homestead title. The original claim was valid. Thomas had filed it properly. Hobbs was trying to destroy the paperwork before federal registration. With the ledger as evidence, the court has confirmed your legal ownership." Miriam took the papers with trembling hands. Her land, her home, legal and secure. "There's more." Esther continued, her eyes bright. "The territorial government is seizing Hobbs's fraudulently acquired lands and redistributing them. You're being granted an additional section adjacent to your homestead as compensation for your losses. 400 acres total with full water rights to Stonebridge Spring." Miriam's breath caught. 400 acres. enough to build a real ranch to give Jonah a future to honor her family's sacrifice. And the water access? Gamda asked from beside her. The new Territorial Water Commissioners has declared Stonebridge Spring public access, Esther said with satisfaction. No fencing within 100 yards. Hobbs's illegal wire will be removed by week's end. Justice and practical reparations, Laurent said approvingly. A rare combination. That evening, as the sun set over White River, Miriam sat on the hotel's front porch, Jonah sleeping peacefully in her arms. Gamda emerged from inside his arm, properly splinted and bandaged, moving stiffly but steadily. He sat beside her without speaking, and they watched the sky turn from gold to red to deep purple. "What will you do now?" Miriam asked after a while. "Return to Fort Stanton, report what happened. Then visit my band, tell them the truth was exposed and justice served. They deserve to know." He paused. "And you? Rebuild, I suppose? For Jonah, for the memory of my family." She glanced at him. "It's a lot of land for one woman and a baby." "You'll find help. Vernon and his family, the other settlers, they'll support you." "I wasn't thinking of Vernon." Miriam's heart hammered as she spoke the words. "I was thinking of you." Gamda turned to face her surprise and something else flickering in his eyes. "Miriam, I know you have obligations. Your band, the cavalry, your own life. But," she took a breath, "when you're finished with those obligations, if you wanted to, there would be a place for you. At the homestead, if you wanted it. You're asking me to stay. I'm asking if you'd consider it. Not now necessarily, but someday, when you're ready." She met his eyes, seeing her own hope reflected there. "We make a good team. We fight well together. And Jonah likes you." "What about you?" His voice was quiet and tense. "Do you like me? I trust you with my life. That's more than liking." Miriam's cheeks heated, but she didn't look away. "In 2 days, you've become one of the most important people in my world. That means something." Gamda was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he reached out his hand, covering hers where it rested on Jonah's blanket. "In the spring," he said slowly, "when the grass is green and the water runs clear, I'll come back. We'll see if we still fight well together when we're not running for our lives. And if we do, then maybe I'll stay." His fingers intertwined with hers, a promise, a possibility. "For as long as you'll have me. Forever, then." Miriam said the word both terrifying and exhilarating. Gamda smiled a full, genuine smile that transformed his usually serious face. "Forever is a long time. We've survived worse than forever in the past 2 days." He laughed a sound of surprised joy, and Miriam found herself laughing too, the sound unfamiliar and wonderful after so much grief and fear. They sat that way as night fell, hands joined watching the stars emerge one by one over the mountains. Jonah slept peacefully between them, safe and loved. And for the first time since the flames had consumed her old life, Miriam felt the stirring of something new, not quite hope, not quite happiness, but the possibility of both. 3 months later, as winter's snow blanketed the New Mexico territory. 1883, Miriam stood in the doorway of her new cabin, watching Gamda split firewood in the yard. He'd returned 2 weeks after the trial, unable to stay away, and had worked alongside her and the neighbors to raise the new house, smaller than the original, but sturdy with thick walls and a stone hearth that Gamda had built with his own hands. Inside the cabin was warm and bright. Fire crackled in the hearth. Shelves held books donated by Esther and tools lent by Vernon. In the corner stood a carved wooden cradle Gamda had made for Jonah, its sides decorated with intricate Apache designs that seemed to flow like water. Jonah sat in the cradle now, nearly 7 months old, babbling happily and reaching for everything within sight. He'd grown strong and healthy, his cheeks round his laughter frequent. He'd never known his mother, but Miriam told him stories about Ruth every night, determined that he would know where he came from, who he'd lost, how much they'd loved him. Gamda entered his arms, full of split logs, snowflakes clinging to his dark hair. He dumped the wood by the hearth and then straightened, brushing off his hands. The shed's full. We'll have enough to last until spring. Good. Miriam handed him a cup of hot coffee, a luxury purchased with money from selling the first wool from their small flock of sheep. You've been working too hard, says the woman who was up before dawn checking the stock. Gamda accepted the coffee gratefully, his fingers brushing hers in a touch that had become familiar and precious. We both work hard. That's how we survive. We're past mere survival now. We're building. True. He sipped the coffee, his eyes warm as they rested on her face. I like building with you. Miriam felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she didn't look away. In the 3 months they'd lived and worked together, the bond between them had deepened into something neither of them spoke of directly, but both understood. It was there in the way Gamda positioned himself between her and any potential danger, in the way Miriam's eyes sought him out whenever he left her sight, in the comfortable silences they shared, and the laughter that came more easily each day. There'd been one evening about a month ago when they'd stood close together by the corral watching the sunset, and Miriam had thought he might kiss her. The moment had stretched, charged with possibility, until Jonah had started crying, and the spell had broken. They hadn't spoken of it, but Miriam thought about it often, wondering if the spring would bring more than green grass and clear water. There's something I need to tell you, Gamda said, setting down his coffee cup. His expression was serious, almost nervous. My band sent word. They're holding a spring gathering in the southern hills, a celebration of renewal and new beginnings. They've invited us, you, me, and Jonah, to attend. Miriam's breath caught. You told them about us. I told them I'd found a place worth staying for, people worth protecting. He met her eyes. They want to meet you, to welcome you if you're willing. A year ago, even 6 months ago, the thought of traveling into Apache lands would have terrified Miriam. She'd grown up hearing stories of raids, and violence had been taught to fear and distrust. But she'd learned that fear was often born of ignorance, and that courage meant facing what frightened you. More importantly, she'd learned that Gamda's people had suffered as much as hers, that they'd been scapegoated and blamed for crimes they hadn't committed, that they'd lost family and homes, just as she had. If there was to be any future in this harsh land, it would have to be built on understanding, not fear. I'd be honored, she said. When do we leave? Relief and joy flickered across Gamda's face. 2 months when the pass is clear. We'll travel slowly so Jonah can adjust. They'll love him. Children are treasured by my people. And me, will they accept me? They'll see what I see, a woman of courage and strength who fights for what's right, who honors her family, who builds rather than destroys. He stepped closer, his hand reaching up to brush a strand of hair from her face. They'll accept you. And if they don't, I'll remind them that you saved a child and brought justice to murderers, and that's worth more than any blood ties. Miriam's throat tightened with emotion. Thank you. For staying, for believing in me, for being here when I needed someone most. I'm the one who should thank you. Gamda's hand cupped her cheek, his touch gentle. You gave me a purpose beyond survival, a home, a family if you'll have me as part of it. I already do, Miriam whispered. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't want. Their lips met in a kiss that was tender and fierce and full of promise. A kiss that spoke of shared grief and hard-won trust and the possibility of joy after darkness. When they finally broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, Miriam rested her forehead against his. "Stay," she said simply. "Not just for spring, not just for a year. Stay. I'm not going anywhere." Gamda replied, his voice rough with emotion. "I told you I'd stay forever. I meant it." From his cradle, Jonah made a happy gurgling sound, as if approving of this development. They turned to look at him, and Miriam felt her heart expand with a feeling she'd thought lost forever: hope. Pure, uncomplicated hope for the future. Outside, the prairie stretched white and clean under the winter sky. Stonebridge Spring ran clear and free, no longer claimed by greed or violence. In Coal Creek, Esther taught her students about justice and courage using Miriam's story as an example. Vernon's children played in the snow building snowmen and dreaming of spring planting. Dr. Laurent tended the sick with patience and skill secure in the knowledge that evil could be defeated by ordinary people willing to fight. And in the small cabin on the hill, a woman, a man, and a child created something new from the ashes of the old, a home built not on stolen land, but on trust earned through fire and flood, on love forged in survival, on the quiet certainty that they belong together. Miriam looked at Gamda, at Jonah, reaching for them both with chubby hands at the life they were building together. "We made it," she said softly. "Against all odds, we made it." "We did," Gamda agreed, pulling her close. "And we'll keep making it one day at a time together." The fire crackled. The wind sang against the cabin walls. Jonah babbled happily. And for the first time since the flames had taken everything, Miriam felt not just alive, but whole.